we're rejoining the session. I'd like to invite to moderate this specific element or part of the program, Ms. Taisha Pillay, who is on the program. Okay, then I guess it's not going to be Taisha Pillay, it's going to be myself. I got an interesting look when I called Taisha's name. But anyways, I'd like to invite Ms. Nompilo Mkunu, who is representing GCIS, the Government Communications and Information Systems, and she'll be providing to us a presentation as well as a broad discussion around maintaining ethics and objectivity during the election period. But specifically, what is the role of GCIS in helping us craft a narrative about the work of government and its institutions? Thank you very much, Ms. Nompilo Mkunu.
Thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. So I'm from Government Communication here in KwaZulu-Natal, and just to give a brief background of GCIS, we are responsible basically as custodians of communication in the country. We coordinate communication for all national departments and some part government entities as well. We have a presence in almost every district in the country, and particularly here in KZN, with the exception of the district where we do have a caretaker, but we do not have somebody that is responsible for GCIS. I'm giving this background because it's important to reflect all the civic education, voter education support that we've been providing to IEC during this election period in all our districts and in all the areas where we have a footprint. When Jobil started, he mentioned something about 30 years of democracy, and I think it's a very significant period in our country that we celebrate 30 years of democracy. It's also just an opportune time to say it's probably also 30 years of media and the freedom of media that came with the democracy that we now enjoy. And in terms of the fundamental democratic values that sort of govern the media, they're somewhat applicable to us as well as government communicators, because GCIS, or government communication, in its essence, it operates from democratic values of openness, transparency, participation, and consultation. And most importantly, consultation with the public and participation of the public in the democratic process and the discourse around issues that affect us as people in the country. And our role in terms of empowering citizens with information is sort of very parallel to the role of media. Media is our key stakeholder. If we have community media like Inanda, sorry, Brian, it's okay, you don't have to yeah, I'll speak to what I prepared here. So just, yeah, it's okay, you don't have to project the presentation. The transparency to ensure that the public is informed about government communication and programs, and they have access to information and every opportunities as well, is our key role as government communication. And we are actually able to achieve that also working with the media. I would say we have Inanda FM here as a key stakeholder of GCIS, and our key mandate is really to work together with particularly community media to convey information to the community. I'm saying this because during the election period, colleagues, we worked very well with the media. In all the districts, about 11 districts that we have in the province, working with community media. We would procure community radio slots and have people from IEC that are based in our provinces, in our districts, engage about the content of whatever IEC is working on, particularly Section 24A, if it is, as Umama had mentioned, you see there was a lot of information gap in that regard. So we were procuring slots, working very closely with IEC to disseminate information during this period of elections. So when I mentioned that our roles with the media are very parallel, it's because we operate as GCIS, as government communication as a whole, from a developmental paradigm, which centers civic engagement at the center of our democratic process. And that also needs media and government communication to work very closely to make sure that we realize its democratic responsibility that we have to include people in the democratic process, and then we stimulate the civic engagement through the information and the content that we share with the public. As we are obligated to provide accurate and clear information about government policies, just as the media, we also use various platforms as GCIS. In this election period, we sort of not just branched out, focusing on mainstream media and community media. We also did a lot of face-to-face engagements, which I think everyone has been emphasizing something about digital media and how important that space is. But the face-to-face element of direct engagement with people, that's what we focused on. And our experience going out to the community with IEC has been that there is an information gap, and a lot was because people are not informed or not actively seeking information of what is happening with IEC and all the electoral amendments. I think in one of the northern regions, a week before elections, we had, when we doing a voter education on Section 24A, we had young people, it was mostly young people, the people that are constantly on their social platforms. Maybe it's also something we need to look at. If we say young people are very much accessing information on social platforms, are they accessing information that is of substance, information that they should engage with, or they just mindless scrolling? You know, because all the people that we were engaging with, most of them had not registered to vote, and they didn't know that they hadn't registered to vote. They were not aware of Section 24A, something that the IEC has heavily been disseminating on social media platforms. So when we encourage the use of social media platforms for young people, are they really using it to advance the democratic process of this country? Or are you scrolling mindlessly? Or are you seeking information? So that's why we opted for those one-on-one and direct engagement, where we were doing our dialogues together with IEC, where we were doing our dialogues with even civil society, multi-stakeholders, to be honest, and engaging them about Section 24A and the elections. And what we found is exactly that. In our experience is that the information gap is wider than we thought it is. There are different segments of society that are able to access information and use it to empower themselves and participate in the discourse of the country. But then there are citizens that are still so marginalized and left behind in the information process. You know, and that creates an even bigger gap of misinformation and disinformation because, people are not consuming information from credible platforms. Namshad mentioned something about media being an information authority and credibility, but also us as government communicators and communication, we seek to be the information authority. If you want credible information about elections, your first stop must also not just be the media, it must also be government platforms as well as the IEC. So our experience has been that, particularly with young people, there was a gap there in terms of voter education. I will admit that there was as much as we have done a lot together with the IEC, I don't think it also breached the voter apathy that young people have in this country. Even if when you go out and you engage them about voting and you share information, they were highly disinterested. They were very disengaged. Hence, if also you look at the report from IEC in the province, it says something about 50 plus thousand spoiled ballots in the province. That reflects that there was an information gap that we did not utilize to say, here are 3 ballot papers. If you have a spoiled ballot, this is what you do. So we ended up having over 50,000 spoiled ballot papers in the province. And for me, that reflects that there wasn't enough education, and like Joe said, that we still need to, we could have done better as government communicators. We could have done better as well along with IEC to bridge the information gap that was there. And also, when engaging with the public on the ground, when we're doing our outreach programs, misinformation and disinformation that is widely been spoken about is very high. It was very, very high, and people actually believe it. Even when you present factual information and credible information, people are just so much caught up on the word of mouth and information that they share with each other. There is misinformation that tends to also threaten our democracy. So that was one of our biggest challenges, that as government communication, we're trying to promote information integrity, and which is also expected from the media colleagues as well, that we are also working against people or with people that choose to consume content from sources that are not credible rather than credible sources. One of our biggest challenges as well when we're out engaging with people during elections is the fact that the language that we were using, I will refer to section 24A again. In terms of their leaflets, we did not have enough content that was in any other language besides English. So when you go out disseminate that content, people will ask you, do you have it in isiZulu? Do you have it in another language that people understand? So when we try to go out to people to disseminate information and engage with people, it's also a duty for us to ensure that we use the language that people understand so that they're able to participate in the democratic process and in the discussions that we are having as a country, and not be left behind because of the information gap. Our efforts were so high, colleagues, that we were even employing methods, platforms of loud hailing in the most remote areas of KwaZulu-Natal, together with IEC. Because there's a segmentation that when we disseminate information gets so much left behind that when we go back, it's just so hard to also make them catch up to the new information platforms and the gaps that they're already so wide. That's pretty much it from my part, but to just emphasize on our media as a key stakeholder, in one of our jobs, Tina, we meet with media almost on a monthly or quarterly basis. Monthly, we share content with the media. Then we are urging media colleagues to also spread to your constituents or your listeners, because when we do not work with the media, because we also understand the influence and the reach that media has, which can be much greater than we can have as government communicators. We collaborate in ensuring that people continue, or the public continues to have credible information and they're informed about government programs. Because if we are only engaging between ourselves as media or as government, And because our point of convergence and the most key people for both us media and government communication is the people, and how often and frequently we disseminate information with the people and engage the people and well as get feedback from people on issues that with the discourse that we're trying to build in the country. You know, even when we're trying to dispel issues of IEC's rigging elections, people already had a preconceived idea, and we were fighting against that because people had already so much embedded in that belief that information we were disseminating was like, oh, you're just being a machinery of the IEC, rather than consuming that information that we were disseminating. So I'd like to just this is just a media report that we would do as GCIS on a daily basis to reflect on the media coverage in terms of elections. And their focus, in which areas of focus the media was mostly focusing on when reporting about IEC or the elections, came up very often. So even pre the elections, there were already discussions of coalitions or preconceived ideas of the IEC and its integrity. So these are just some of the headlines where we had positive, neutral, and very negative coverage from the media. And in turn, we see about farm workers not being able to exercise their votes. So there was a gap, because those are the segmentations that often we are not able to reach as government communication, but also depending on the media to reach those people like laborers and farm workers, because they might not get the opportunity to exercise their rights, maybe because they're engaged in the activities of 7-0 during that period. Please go. Yes, there was great coverage on safety and security during the election period. Yes, there was also service delivery issues and protests that were in the Eastern Cape. But in essence, people or the media were more concerned about safety and security because of probably the July unrest and the expectations that there will probably be some sort of instability after the elections in the country. Thank you. And there was great coverage as well on youth. Yes. On the youth vote. Because there were great expectations, I suppose, because media or other sectors adapted the 1994, the 2024 is our 1994 day. So the expectation was that young people will go out and vote. So there was high reporting on that, where the media was encouraging the youth to vote and to rewrite the narrative. And also the political parties that the young people were voting for was also having the media agenda as well. Can we scroll to the next slide, please? The logistics, the logistics were heavy on the media agenda. I think they're also heavy on government communication agenda in terms of, even though I feel like this part of logistics sort of overshadowed the most important part of voter education, is that there was too much focus on the logistics, fair enough, but we also need to balance it with the voter education, encouraging people to go out to vote and leave the logistics, I suppose, to the IEC as an organization. Yes, great coverage on the economic impact of post-elections and how the coalitions, information of coalitions would look like post-elections, as well as political party campaigns. There was, Brian mentioned something about the role of political parties as well in terms of educating people and being part of the process of saying, here's section 24A, we have 3 ballot papers now. As political parties, communication and campaigns, it was also their responsibility to make sure that their constituents have that information. Thank you. So I'll focus as well on the findings. Obviously on election day, the news coverage was focused more on election day. The safety hotspots, particularly in the Eastern Cape, as well as here in KwaZulu-Natal. And media coverage indicated strong voter encouragement from various media houses that were reporting about elections. Yes, there was still a great concern about special votes and how some people are left behind and not informed about special voting in Section 24A. Yes, and then, we stick to the recommendation on security measures as well as messages, because a lot of people, colleagues, also because they couldn't access their official documentations like your ID, ended up not being able to vote because they're probably not informed that Home Affairs is operating and they are allowing people to come collect their ID so that they'll be able to exercise their democratic right. Thank you. So there was a lot of information gap that has led to probably a lower turnout in the polls, but we remain as government communication and along with the media as champions of information and the democratic process in the country. Thank you so much.
Apologies. You can take a seat there for now, Matlingwa. Thank you for that presentation. Before I open the floor for questions, can I ask you directly, what is the impact or necessity of having these ministries, or embassies and the ministries now becoming so essentially the political heads have now become the face of the social media accounts of these ministries. What's the point of that? Why is that culture emerging and continuing?
It's mostly about brand identity, really. We can't shy away from the fact that people recognize institutions also based on the political representation. So we as much as we try to separate that, because the information is not about just the politician, it cannot be separated, but it's just about brand awareness that we use politicians as the faces of the social media platforms.
Thank you for the serious response. Thank you. No, thank you. I'll give you the mic. Any questions, direct engagement with the work of GCIS? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. There are questions at the back from the staff. 2, 3, and then maybe another one for now. One more hand at the back somewhere or on the sides. Cool. Let's take those 3 for now. And then we'll come back to just non-graded for answers. Yeah. Hi. Oh, I used to like. When I was like this, no, I'm joking.
Okay, mine is just a proposal to Sister Consultant from Sister Nompilo. For you in future purposes to prevent this thing of gap information escalation to the community. I think the mapping of the grassroots organization can offer assistance in terms of engaging yourself with them. Even if you are gone, we'll be able, like myself, I'm from the community-based organization based in Tamlazi. Yes, it's an urban area, but yeah, there's lots happening in the community. And with this 2024 election, there was lots of confusion. Let alone the papers, Section 21, people were so confused, especially to the 3 ballot papers. Some they even ask you where to, how can I see the political party that I wish to vote for? Because I was involved in one of the voting stations. And it was like, yeah. Akuzange kwenzeke kahle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ma. You can pass it on to your colleague on your right.
Thank you so much, Matibane, for that insightful information that was presented. On my side, I actually want to concur with you. What you did a lot of activation in trying to stimulate civic education, but that was not achieved. Ngoba, you would find in youth spaces, a lot of the youth with the emblem yokuthi it's an activation of the civic education, so the IEC, and you don't get to see IEC doing any education. I'm not sure ukuthi it's the mandate that you gave to facilitators of the programs, or kube khona nje into eyinkinga ngoba there were a lot of activations, but IEC uzothola MEC a disseminator worse information error akutshela abantu ukuthi bazothola one ballot when there is section 24A in place, and we needed to communicate that. Number two, into ye section 24A, I need to understand from your office now, as a lead department, how do you ensure that there are legacy projects emalokishini in informal areas, your urban areas, la esokwenza sure ukuthi this does not die out. 2029 is still going for general elections. Nizokwenzani ukuthi this information is still communicated, is not lost. Ngoba at the moment, IEC vele mengathi uya kwi-community okhuluma ngalo section 24A, because of this misinformation disseminatekile ngawo, ngeke nje abantu bawulalele. But the office lakho has that duty to ensure ukuthi i-communication is kept at place, iyaqhubeka yenzeke ngaso sonke isikhathi. If we can respond to that, ukuthi legacy projects in place, ithini. And lastly, you did make mention ukuthi abantwana abalaleli information accurate enizanayo. Mhlambe you need to change the strategy. You need to put peer-led interventions because they listen to their peers. So if ningaba nama champions, youth or ambassadors which will be informed and so ensure ukuthi kuma communities they communicate such relevant information vele lalelwayo kuzoba khona ke a way forward, because you cannot repeat one and the same thing and expect different results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that we're looking as far as 2029, when 2026 is also going to be knocking at the door. We don't know. IEC was chair, you know, things could change significantly, and we don't know enough about it. Nomzane from Happy Valley.
Yeah, thank you. I know my question was just what the previous person asked was that moving forward, what is GCI is going to do to ensure that these gaps that were identified coming 2026 and 2029 are much less than what they are now. But also in terms of Section 24, which everybody is talking about, I think a lot of information was shared, and people knew that you needed to vote, register where you voted. But there were instances where I registered to vote at a certain voting district, at a voting station, but when I get there, I still don't have my information. What do I then do as a voter from there? That information was not available. It was not made available to the voter and saying, if you get there and you've registered there, but your information is not there, what do you then do? Which was a very tricky thing because now people didn't know. And even IEC officials, when you were asking them, what do you then do as a voter, they didn't know. And in fact, there was actually a form that they could have been filling in and they could have continued voting against station, which that information was not readily available. And I think another also thing is that laws change every time, and public participation is necessary for these laws before they change. Before Section 24 was changed, and it was actually a law, it was not, we didn't know that public participation is happening. So how do we engage in public participation, and how do you share that information with communities and say, look, there's a public participation happening here, come and engage. When do we see that information, and how do you send out that information? I think it's very important.
Cool. I think, thank you very much, brother. Before you answer that question, can I ask our previous speakers, Mr. Harbour, Mr. Harbour, Jovial, as well as Nomshado, because I think as we wrap up this session, some of the questions will cut across, and perhaps you can provide us some perspective as well as it relates to your specific area of expertise. You can start responding whilst our colleagues also move up as well. Some of the questions that you picked up to go directly to you.
Okay. No, thank you, Brian. I'll first respond to the question of IEC and their visibility during voter education programs and communication programs.
Yeah, go for it.
You are right. IEC was very visible. GCIS was doing a lot of community activation programs. But I will also mention, as Jovial has alluded, that there were threats on IEC officials, particularly where I experienced a situation in northern KZN where a week before the elections we were set to do a voter education program with IEC. But IEC could not go out, they could not even wear IEC branding because people were, I wouldn't say attacking them, but they were not receptive of information coming from IEC. So that's where GCIS then came in, because we'd probably be seen as more neutral than IEC because people already had a perception of IEC. So it's not that maybe they were not as visible or part of the community engagements and education programs. There was a question about a legacy project. I think IEC, not just on the perspective of communication, but IEC throughout the year has voter democracy programs, particularly targeting schools in particular. So those young people that tend to probably listen to more of their peers could, engage in those spaces and have those young people be champions of each other and of accurate information. So there's always, a space where we can use young people and peers to spread information to each other. And Democracy Week is one of those spaces that IEC utilizes to encourage that sort of engagement amongst young people. Oh, yeah. I think there are many lessons that we, as government communication and probably as IEC as well, because we've learned, but we debrief and we strategize better for the next election, and we focus on areas where we feel like that we lacked, particularly with the youth and information on legislation and the changes. So we still going to debrief and find new platforms of engaging with people and ensuring that they are part of the conversation, not just after elections, but even during this period where we are headed for another election period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof. Mr. Harbour. Sorry. What's your analysis of the sort of professionalization of the media space? There was a lot of questions from our colleague who's just had to step out around the needing to set a benchmark for the quality of journalists that we have in the space, the quality of publications, the quality of media houses. To what extent does that go directly against the idea of free expression as per your campaign? There can be checks and balances, but how do you not limit the voices that are available and the plurality of opinions and views?
Yeah, the key institution here are the Press Council and the Broadcast Complaints Commission. It seems to me that professional journalists who subscribe to the Code of Conduct and subject themselves to the discipline of these industry organizations, that's what separates a journalist from an ordinary person, from a real person. You can go out and you can tweet whatever you want, but if you want people to believe and trust you, you need to be part of an accountability process. And what we've set up is the Press Council and the Broadcast Complaints Commission, which have codes of conduct, which are reviewed every few years, but they set the standard for critical issues of accuracy, ethical behavior, professionalism. So we don't want to stop anyone speaking out unless they're breaking the law.
Yeah.
And people must be free to speak out. It's only if they, for example, cross the line into hate speech or malicious disinformation that the law may come into it. But it's very important that I think, the Press Council, for example, is not perfect, but it is the best mechanism to say, I accept the rules and therefore you can trust me.
Thank you so much. Nomshado, from the work that MMA has done, how much of the credibility or the disdain that the media is facing, how much of it is self-inflicted? So to what extent is it reflective? Is the media reflective about its own positionality in the context of a democratic South Africa? And how do they craft and position themselves sort of to a contemporary time? Has the media changed the way it goes about and does its work? Or has it been responsive to the times that we live in? Or are they still sort of stuck somewhere, doing things as per, our grandfathers and grandmothers, your Helen Sinsmans and Helen Zil, she was a journalist at some point, apparently, supposedly, allegedly. So, yeah, those are the things.
So I think as much as anyone would have loved to get stuck in that era, there was a forced push that happened because of, as I said, the way information has now broadened in terms of different dissemination mechanisms. And it prompted a lot of continuous reflections, never mind on sustainability issues, and I think it was raised around, subscriptions and all, which is one of the, solutions that some media houses came about with in terms of being able to sustain themselves, which is a whole different issue on its own. And then what also social media has done, or digital media rather broadly, it also brought about, the same space whereby they can also be held accountable by citizens themselves based on what they're engaging with and what they read. And I think it even goes back to the understanding that they've got a responsibility and also a role to adhere to. And I think the bodies that were mentioned are doing that job in that regard. The reflections mostly come about when, number one, credibility, I think, even about a decade ago, started becoming an issue. There was a time where trust was at an all-time low, and this was not only media as an institution, but state was also, in terms of trust, was at a low, a number of institutions. And this really does prompt, a sector to start looking at how do we position ourselves again, to where we want to see ourselves. I mean, it was mentioned it's 30 years of democracy, also 30 years of media freedom. And when you've got veteran journalists who are there fighting for the very same freedom that we have today, saying that the vision was that, not the vision, but what they were fighting for is that media is a reflection or a mirror of our society. Yeah. I think again that the Joe who continuously echoes that. And the reality that that very same reflection or mirror can be tainted by various things is something that obviously came to rise as the years were going by. The importance of looking from now to onwards, I think is very important. There's a number of key things that media currently is dealing with that is prompted to start looking at. How will it operate within this digital media space that continues, by the way, to grow? I mean, we slept and woke up one day, there was ChatGPT. That can write a whole article for you, right?
Sometimes very poorly.
Sometimes very poorly, but it continues to learn as well, the more people are feeding it, right? And obviously there's another behind mechanism in that I won't go into depth. But the reality is that we can sleep and wake up the next day and there can be a new technology or a new phenomenon or a new AI tool created. How do we ensure that media is able to adapt with the continuous changes and still maintain its position within our democracy? Because at the end of the day, we can't even begin to compare when we're talking about the role of media in that regard.
Cool. You know, you speak about AI now. I was writing a report for Observer Mission, and I got tired of typing out, and I used the voice to text thing, and I was concerned after that, will people think maybe AI wrote that for me, because we don't know what sort of generative mechanisms, when you're assessing whether the work is of your own. Obviously I didn't type that out manually, but the voice to text might be picked up as a problematic tool. I don't know, I was just being a bit, you know, in the same way in which the IEC might have to be a bit more schizophrenic about its image. I am also concerned about how my work is received out there in the world. To yourself and Mr. Harbour, the issue of funding for media, a very important discussion. Paywalls are problematic because you limit, but at the same time, there's a crisis, as you mentioned earlier. Both of you mentioned the idea about publications having to shut down because there just isn't enough funding. But there's also a discussion about a demand aspect of it. But on the funding aspect, when you have so much of the non-mainstream media, particularly social media, placing an emphasis on asking questions about where money comes from, and the impact that money has on the type of publications and news that is put out there. Are there models that you've started to think of, or at least are seeing, that make sense for how to continue to fund the work of media and journalism in a way that doesn't impugn the credibility of those publications?
Yes, there's an important and rich debate going on on how we're going to sustain or grow new media and fund it now that the traditional business model is dead or dying. And let me say this, wherever you get your money has its issues and problems. And that's why diversity is such an important, diversity of sources of money and the way it's used and outlets is, I think, the best counter to that, and ways of funding things that are at arm's length from the funding source are obviously preferable. You know, you dismiss paywalls, subscriptions, but it's part of the model, I'm afraid. We're increasingly going to have to pay for accurate, trustworthy journalism. If it gives us value, we'll be prepared to pay for it. So what I'm saying is that there isn't one answer, but there are many answers. Advertising will continue to be one element, although it's a much smaller element than it's been in the past. Philanthropy, or the support of wealthy individuals and foundations, has become a key element in certain kinds of journalism. And in fact, a lot of our media now depends on it. Some of our best media is produced. Some of our, interestingly, media supported by philanthropy at the moment is more stable and more sustainable than commercial media. What a turnaround. But there's an increasing discussion about public funding in some form. What happened in Australia, I mean, there are countries like the Scandinavian countries that have long had public support for media. Australia passed a law that forced the big tech platforms to negotiate with the publishers fair compensation for their news. And they did that. That's now being renegotiated. We've got difficulties, and Canada's following, Europe is following. They did it directly with publishers. What we're talking about here is trying to set up a public fund. SANEF, in fact, is setting up a trust to play that role. Because it's felt that if an operation like Google, which has opened the discussion, gives some money to local media, you need independent trust to make sure it's at arm's length from Google, and that's accepted. And also there's a feeling that if you have an independent trust, you know, if you negotiate with the publishers, the big publishers will win. Whereas if you have a public fund, then they can say, okay, we're giving 30% to community media or whatever. Make sure there's a reasonable spread. There's complications, there's difficulties. There's talk also that the state must contribute to that fund. There's a sense that the MDDA hasn't had enough money and hasn't been well managed. Maybe an independent fund can complement that, not necessarily replace it. There's a lot of issues around it. There's talk that there should be, perhaps if you start taxing the big platforms who are making money here, that should go into a media fund.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you have anything to add, Michelle? Okay, cool.
Just to add on the public funding part, and you know, as mentioned, that being actually one of the key points to one of the solutions, and a lot of conversations also from the public perspective have been around, you know, if I am paying for this, then this goes to the value as well, the finding value within those news, or finding value within the content that the media house is bringing about. And I think part of that is really going back to, as I think echoed previously, to understand that value aspect of it. And that supply and demand part of it when it comes to that value is quite key, looking at the various solutions that were mentioned.
Thank you so much, Jovial. The IEC has a lot of work, or rather the IEC is going to, has been dealing with a lot of attacks on its integrity. Whose work is it going to be in the eyes of the public? Whilst maybe of no intention of your own, you've been thrown into the public space. You're a Chapter 9 institution, you're hired and fired in certain ways, you are held publicly accountable in certain ways, but none of the information seems to be making it out there in the general discourse, even in the media. Whose work is it to educate about those very intricate elements, which might not be as interesting for the public to be engaged on?
No, thank you very much. I just wanted to add one sentence to what Anton and Nomshado said, and that is that media is a public good. You know, and if all of us recognize that, we will see the need to support independent and free media. But to answer your point, you know, just to give you a sense, there were 14,292, I think, candidates for the 2024 elections. You know, all of them were contesting 887 seats. That means that there was in excess of 14,000 angry people out there, disappointed people, who will be looking for any and all excuses, you know, pointing fingers at everybody else, starting with the IEC, but not themselves. You know, so the IEC is well aware that, you know, it's a low-hanging fruit for people who are politically disappointed and to be attacked. And it is our duty, first and foremost, to protect the reputation of the institution, and we do that working with a whole lot of institutions like the MNA and a whole lot of others. You know, but also to say that the voter education and other civic and democracy education programs do not end now because we have a result of the 2024 elections. In fact, you know, there's an election practically every month that the IEC has to manage. The almost 100 by-elections in this province alone, sometimes, you know, small scale, you know, because it's a by-election in one voting district, but it's an election nonetheless, and it's not held to a lower standard. You know, so in a year, you could have anything between 800 to 1,000 elections that the IEC has to manage. That's what happens in between your national and provincial elections and the local government elections. And to help maintain and protect our reputation, you know, is to have this continuous messaging out there that the IEC does what it can do. The IEC does well in discharging its constitutional obligations. And as someone who's quite new to the organization, I can tell you now that I have never seen an organization so transparent as the IEC. If I'm speaking as a citizen of this country, I would want every organization that is a public organization to be like and better than the IEC. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think you guys must set up your own.
Can I add something?
Sure, go for it.
And it might be controversial, so
Go ahead.
I do want to say, it's been on my mind, that there were instances of people unhappy with the result, who threatened violence online. There were attacks on one particular commissioner, Janet Love. You're entitled to criticize anything, you're entitled to criticize Ms. Love, but some of it went beyond that. And threats. I want to know why those people who put those out weren't arrested on the same day.
Very important
It
question.
seems to me that when you cross that line, I'm not saying you shouldn't criticize the IEC, when you cross that line into threats of violence against a person or society, you should be arrested the same day.
No, Jovial can answer. Who places the charges? Is it the individual person who's impacted? Is it the institution that they work for? Or is it subsequent to just go charge people?
It is the IEC in the main has to lay charges, but nothing stops the law enforcement agencies from acting when the law is violated. You know. And the last point that I really wanted to make is that media freedom. Anton and Namsalo have spoken eloquently about why it has to be defended. And it's a responsibility of everyone in this room and beyond to do that. And I think that institutions that support democracy, like the IEC, also deserve to be defended and protected. I'm not saying hide their wrongs and don't point them out, but when people want to pull down the pillars of this democracy for no reason, I think they need to be pointed out. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shirley.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about threat culture that Anton you just brought up now, and how it's somewhat of a manifestation of cancel culture that stems from social media. And what Jovial you had said in our session a bit earlier on about how people can hide behind troll accounts, and in the name of freedom of speech, say whatever they want to say without any consequence because they've kept it anonymous for themselves. And I think, of course, platforms that you guys have are attempting to help with that. But again, I think this speaks to this very difficult culture that media has to adapt to, where now people are going from a Twitter space that's online, where I'm sending you death threats or I'm doxing you from afar, from behind my computer, you don't know who I am, and so it ends there, to now all of a sudden being a physical manifestation and an actual threat in a person's life. And it's not just an issue that South Africa faces in its democracy, where we can see with extreme MAGA accounts, particularly on the Truth platform. There was an AI-generated photo of Joe Biden being dragged as if it was like a lynch mob, remembrance of the 1960s. And then people heading out to the White House and literally dropping ropes as a response back to that image. And so just an observation from my side of this dangerous culture that media is in now, of having to see how something was supposed to just stay online is now quite literally a manifestation of our reality today. And as a result of it, makes it difficult then to defend institutions like the IEC, because how do you defend it without you yourself then having those threats being directed towards you for standing up for a Chapter 9 institution? And so I think those boundaries are very difficult to establish, especially if on another level, having a government that people don't necessarily trust. I mean, we're speaking about now the fact that police and the army were deployed during this election season, but for a lot of people, the perception of that was, how can we even trust them, considering, kind of the past behaviors of the government, of the state. And part of that is manipulated with the realities that people are living with on social media. So that threat, violence, cancel culture line is a very tricky one, and I think, I don't know, good luck.
Cool. You want to respond to that, Michelle?
I just want to add how we have normalized online harassment and violence to a point where the sensitivity of it has been stripped completely away. It's been normalized to a point where if we see terms such as we're going to burn the country down if a certain political party doesn't win, we're going to march and mobilize to the streets, we've normalized such terms. But in reality, they're the most dangerous terms that actually lead to offline violence transpiring. And I'm actually happy that Anton echoed the harassment and those posts, because they translated on different platforms in different ways. So we are moving from a Twitter, which is more content and text, and we moved to TikTok, where it was pictures of burning tires and so forth. And the mere fact that it morphs in different formats, in different platforms, it's even more different and dangerous rather, because it's painting a picture of normalizing violence. In a country where we all know how a spark can really cause havoc. The July unrest showed us that. The role of social media in doing that. The harassment perspective is, if you strip away somebody's, and I say somebody because I'd like to just paint a picture of imagining that the IEC was an individual. If you're stripping away somebody's integrity and credibility, and you only pinpoint to one thing, the way troll and troll networks work on social media, you just need one person to start it. And you're really going to start getting the network to follow. And what we saw there was, it started with one spark and became a fire in between other fires that was happening. And it was also normalized that we are used to seeing harassment online, so we shouldn't even be blinking an eye, but we should be. So I just want to echo the sentiments of even bringing in officials. The idea of online violence, cyber threats, cyber security is also something that we need to start talking about in our future, that we understand how to deal with these threats from an online perspective as much as we know how to deal with them from an offline perspective. If we're not even looking at from an official, SAP's point of view.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to take 2 or 3 more questions, but before I go there, Mamtun, Uyanga just did it now about the state versus government versus the party that's leading. There's a very important distinction that doesn't seem to be drawn adequately in our public discourse. Words are used interchangeably. As someone who works for government, regardless of who's in power, how are you using that messaging to increasing public awareness about the role of government in times when we don't necessarily have political leadership? How does that work continue to happen, at least in terms of the work that administration itself is meant to be doing? How do you separate the administration versus the public-facing political leadership? And then there's a second part of that is, what are the internal regulatory demands on you as a government communicator on your partisan versus non-partisanship when communicating directly about government work, the work of government?
No, thank you for the question. The work of government continues whether, I suppose, there are political leaders, because the administrators remain in positions. So our role as GCIS or government communication is sort of assuring the public that as much as there's all these talks and coalition and administration not appointed in positions, the public is still part of government, or the public must also know that the functionality of operation of government is not just reliant only on a politician. So when we go out and engage with people, we engage from a non-biased perspective of government information or government positions is not necessarily so linked to a political party or a politician, because it's really, there's a thin line where we try to ensure that people know that just because a certain political party is in government, it doesn't mean that now they are the government. Yes.
Can I
Sure.
add something?
Yes, and then Jovial after you. Yes, please.
Oh, sorry, am I jumping ahead? I think there need to be some rules about government, about state-funded organizations, advertising, during elections and other times. How often do you see adverts where the biggest thing is the minister's face or the MEC's face? They're there to promote that individual. Shouldn't be using state money for it. There was you know this MEC in Gauteng who got a lot of flack. I think her name is Schlorpe. A lot of flack about the money for NGOs that was held up and was missing. Then I see there's a spate of adverts last week defending her and praising what good work she does, paid for by the province. I'm sorry, this is an abuse of state money.
All she can do is say, we hear you.
Institution. So then they become the face of that advertising and so forth, because then people would probably identify with the department and understand the work of the department just because there's a politician driving the message. But I don't think it's necessarily an abuse of state funds. I say that because no, colleagues, it can't be now 3 against 1. I'm trying to defend the honor of government.
It's Kendrick versus Trace all over again. No, we hear you. I think to say I hear you would have been a better response. You can't defend all of government on your own.
No, I can't. But noted, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. Leadership.
I think it's important maybe to say two things that have no bearing to my responsibility as IEC, but as a citizen of this country. You know, I think it's important to have a clear separation between party and state. You know, so that the notion of the abuse that Anton was talking about, it's very clear and noticeable if it happens. The second thing is, when you look at the thread of what we've been talking about in relation to disinformation and malinformation on social media, there's this big issue of lack of accountability. You know, that talks to this creeping culture of lawlessness in our country that must be addressed. You know, people need to have a fear of something, that if you do something wrong, the consequences will be yours to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think part of the lack of accountability, or the lack of fear of accountability, started with the 2021 July unrest. We still don't know the face of the people who were at the top of the incitement of that violence. We saw the people who perpetrated the violence being charged, but we didn't see the people who incited that violence necessarily being charged. And so it's continued from that point, I think.
If you compare that quickly in a second with what happened on January 6th in the capital rise, the number of people who've been convicted and now serving time, anything between 8 and 30 years, you get my point.
Exactly. Because the scale is quite similar and probably even worse. Any other hands aside from Manzuza? Any other hands before we close it off for the day? Okay, just Manzuza. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, once again for indulging me. This one goes to Jovial. Your personal view, say, do you perhaps think you've done enough, adequately so, in optimizing the media freedom, in redressing some of the mis and disinformation, particularly in instances where some security material was found in spaces where they were not vetted or authorized warehouses? do you think if you had responded to such cases, we could have saved the integrity of IEC? Thank you.
What would you have, when you say responding, what does it mean? Like, would you have wanted charges to be laid, or something the IEC to put out information about
yes,
that?
IEC to sort of give maybe a media briefing why such information would be there. Remember, there are protocols that we would observe that was communicated to PLC members. But if then you digress from the protocol, there's obviously steps that you need to engage and ensure that community is kept abreast on why such is happening. Because obviously there would have been valid reasons why it was there. But you choosing not to respond, it sort of lays that fear in the community to say, yeah, definitely. Looking at KZN in particular, there was high contestation in terms of political parties. So,
Can I ask, sorry for the interruption, for you to be a little bit specific, because I'm not sure which incident you're referring to.
And
okay,
yeah,
I understand.
Sure.
All right, let me just say quickly that the elections are a big undertaking by the country. The only thing bigger than the logistics of the national and provincial elections is a world war. That's how big this thing is, and it requires military precision just in terms of being organized, making sure that ballots are printed on time and are delivered on time, and the right ballots are delivered to the right voting districts. It's a massive, massive operation, And what happened at the Hammersdale, for instance, was, people, and I think for ulterior political motives, discovered a truck delivering ballots to a central point, and these are political activists, and they had unauthorized access to that venue, and took pictures and said, you see, voting has begun. The truth is that the IEC had to print in excess of 90 million ballots for all the 23,292 voting stations across the country. Before May 29, the ballots had to get to a central point, let's say around eThekwini. From there they get distributed to the different voting districts so that everything is ready for voting day. That is something that needs to happen. They need to be transported from point 1 to point 2 in preparation of the election. There's nothing untoward with that. The IEC responded, and again, as I said earlier, maybe we should have responded quicker, but we did respond to point that out that, look, the ballots can't get from the printer to the voting district by some osmosis. They need to be transported by trucks, etc., etc. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that people seem to be saying is the IEC must stop trying to be the biggest person in the room. You must set up your own bot accounts and start leaking information to the public. You have PLCs that people sit on and they agree, and you must disclose all of those minutes when they are there. Who was at the PLC meeting when you discussed it, this and that is going to happen? Why are they pretending like they don't know now in the public? Don't get that on me. What are you collecting, Dina?
Brian must
for online people.
Brian, what needs to be done, and I think we carry the responsibility as leaders to really correct some things.
What are we correcting?
What Jovial is saying, and I think this is what the IEC really makes a mistake of, it's almost one as insulting the intelligence of the public. That as if the public cannot see that something is wrong, and it's only IEC who knows, and IEC knows right. That's problematic. Two, IEC sits at PLC meetings. I'm fortunate to have led a political party before and have contested elections. and particularizing committees. The IEC says the ballots are going to arrive on the night before, they are going to stay at Shelengula High School. When we discover them, they're not at Shelengula High School, they're at Bangu Secondary School. Now that's a problem. The IEC goes and stores sensitive election material in tuck shops, and it's political activists who are just having their own agenda. No. The IEC must take responsibility. These elections, the IEC didn't do so well. The IEC didn't have a proper election management plan that really worked to restore the integrity of the IEC. The IEC now can't come and say, no, but people are injuring our integrity. No. You injured your own integrity. You didn't have proper systems in place. You can't be storing sensitive material of elections in tuck shops, my friend. You can't be transporting.
Okay.
Wait.
No. When we're helping each other, let's do it fairly. So which tuck shops are you talking about? Don't use tuck shops as a... No. The way the ballots were discovered was the Hamilton incident. Are there other ballots? Are there other ballots that you're aware of that were discovered in tuck shops?
But that's
which
not
tuck shops are these?
That's what I'm saying. Right? Whether or not you stop me or you don't stop me.
I think
the people are still, wait, there's people who are sitting in this room, they know what we're talking about. In Wamapumulo, in a tuck shop, in Wamapumulo, there's videos. People are not making accusations against the IEC out of the sky. There are videos, Brian. We're not speaking about something I heard from my friend. We're here speaking about something that is in a video. Okay. So if the IEC says these things are tampered with, that is problematic. No, but what I don't like what is the idea that says those people who are up there, they know it all, we are wrong, we're just accusing them. It's problematic, it's inciting our intelligence on the things we see. So the things we see are wrong. When I say in 1/3 in Etewi, the results that were punched into the system and the result that party agents got in the voting station are not the same. I'm entering the intelligence of the IC. Come on, Professor zoning gun. No, as zoning gun, we must be treated as adults. If this idea of saying how we are just emotional, if the reason why we become emotional is because we are being addressed as if we are stupid and we are just being malicious. When there is evidence out there, and the IEC hasn't done, and this is what I've been saying, the IEC hasn't done a serious job of trying to make sure that what the accusations that people are making are proven to be false. What the IEC has been doing, no, it's disinformation, no, it's misinformation. What is the correct information? That when we go to your dashboard, what is on the voting stations, it's not the same.
Okay, so next week, we're also hosting a political forum. We're going to engage on some of these specific instances, and we hope that when you get the invitation, you'll RSVP. But not all of you, because some of you are just media. But we want to know but what is important is that, and I hear you, Chubani, I hear your frustration, but what's also important is that when we talk, but I'm being serious here. When we address issues of this nature, we must try and be as specific as possible. To protect Jovial. Jovial is addressing an issue of Hammondsdale specifically. But beyond that, I'm in agreement with Tobani in the sense that sometimes it appears dismissive in the way in which you engage some because of the internal bureaucratic processes that have to happen. You end up responding in a relative generality to some of the issues that come up, because you're taking in multiple instances and you generalize about the instances that are being talked about in a way that seems dismissive to some people's genuine concerns about the quality of our elections. To close us off, as a response directly to that, perhaps.
No, all I wanted to say is that, I was responding to a specific incident, and I thought that I should explain this logistical undertaking. But to Tobani's questions and concerns about tax shops and other matters, the NPLC exists for that specific reasons. If there are concerns or evidence or of any kind that needs to be addressed, it should be just submitted through the proper channels, and it will be addressed. I have not heard of the incidents that are being referred to, but I think that if they are submitted through the right channels, they will get the proper attention of the commission.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Tell Taisha, you're going to tell us thank you to everyone, and then of course, hopefully lunch is ready somewhere. And then we'll proceed. Thank you very much. A round of applause to our guest speakers, and then a round of applause to yourselves for your contributions.
Hi everyone, I know you're in a rush to get to lunch, so I'll make it quick. I'm Taisha Pillay. I am a political strategist, communication strategist at the Democracy Development Program. On behalf of the DDP, Inanda FM, and CAS, we would like to thank you all for joining us. The discussion was very insightful. As a political science student, I love the energy, I learned so much, I love the passion. And yeah, please follow us on social media. Please RSVP to the political summit happening next week. We would love this energy to be in the room again. So we hope to see you guys there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lunch, colleagues, is being served at the touch-up that's downstairs, not the one that's